In this video, we're going to talk about 3 important things to know for your driving privileges if you're charged with a DWI in Texas. My name's Trey Porter. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in Texas. We've got a lot of information in the videos. We've got even more information in the articles over on the website. Check it all out. Knowledge is power. I hope you get the answers that you need. Let's get into it. 3 things to know about your driving privileges if you're charged with DWI in Texas. The big picture is this: it's going to be okay. But let's go over the 3 things. Number 1, your license is going to be suspended. This comes from the implied consent law, and that simply states that if an officer asks you to give a specimen of your breath or blood, that you've got to do it. There's an implication of consent. I know that you may not think that you consented. I certainly didn't sign anything saying that I consent, but we all consent because it is implied. That's the law in Texas. So if you refuse, you get an automatic administrative suspension. If you don't refuse, but you provide a specimen that's above the legal limit, you also get a suspension. This is the proverbial damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. So you're very likely watching this after the fact. Just know that that is how it is categorized no matter what you did. So that's number 1, that early suspension is going to come administratively. And it's important to know, it's not coming from the judge that's going to make decisions in your case. It's not coming from the prosecutors that are fighting to potentially incarcerate you and certainly convict you for the serious criminal offense of DWI. It's coming from Austin. It's coming from the Department of Public Safety and the administrative attorneys that work there upholding this law that we have about implied consent or a suspension based off of operating over the legal limit. So it's one of those things. That's number 1 to know when you're going through this process. Number 2 is you can contest it. And if you're watching this video, please listen carefully on this. You should contest it. Now, there's a 15-day deadline that's super sneaky and way too short that the government has set that we all have to request this hearing to contest that administrative suspension under. So this is one of the things that is going to come up almost always before your first court date even comes up. But this is where counsel is important. Get an attorney, get a firm, and those people or that person will know what to do, and they will know how to preserve your request for the hearing. And the hearing is an important thing to do, not because it's some magic way to get out of the suspension. Although it does delay the suspension is almost always inevitable. But the real reason to do it is that by doing it, by exercising your right to due process, your attorneys can get the officer or officers that made the decisions in your case into the hearing. They can get them under oath and they can ask them questions about what happened. Now, depending on the circumstances of the situation, it might be very cut and dried. On the other hand, it might be a little subjective. The officer might have kind of fudged why they pulled you over or made a mistake and then tried to cover it up in the paperwork, and through this testimony that can be exposed. No matter what it is, it creates an opportunity for a discrepancy, and discrepancies are how you can win a DWI case. So it's always, always, always worth doing. So number 3 in this process, we've covered the first 2. You're going to get a suspension. Number 2 is you should challenge the suspension. Number 3 in this process is the most important one. And number 3 is that no matter what, you will always have an opportunity to drive legally while facing a DWI charge in Texas. So even if you get that early suspension, even if it goes into effect, you will instantly, like the same minute that it happens, become eligible for what's called an occupational driver's license. Now, an occupational driver's license is something that may be intentioned as far as the law goes to only help people who need it for their occupation. But in actuality, you can get an occupational license and use it for almost anything that you need to use it for. So if you have to take your kids to school, if you're picking people up from practices, if you're taking your parents to doctor's appointments, if you yourself are needing it for just life things, whether that's going to the gym, going to the grocery store, going to church, whatever it may be, you can use an occupational license for those things. So it may be a little inconvenient and not as nice as having your regular driving privileges, but it will still get the job done during that window of suspension from the Department of Public Safety. So remember, 3 big things associated with your driving privileges when facing a DWI. Number one, you're going to get an early suspension. Number two, you can challenge that suspension, and you always should. And number three, no matter what, you can drive legally during the pendency of the suspension with an occupational license. I know that's a lot. I hope that answers your questions. If you have more questions, there are more videos about this topic and more articles over on the website that get into it in really deep detail.